Hi everyone, and thanks for watching this video. My name's Chris Rutledge, and I'm going to show you some of my interesting rigging techniques that I've come up with in Houdini using the KineFX rigging system, which has been around since Houdini 18.5, and it's become my sort of go-to way of rigging and animating characters. It's been a total game changer for my workflow. It's different from the way that all the other softwares work. It's a very unique tool that just Houdini has, and I really love it, and I want to show off sort of the stuff that I figured out, which is a bit unconventional, but it's been so useful for me, and I have a feeling it might be useful for you as well. So the first thing that I want to show here is this character that I have. This character was created by the amazing VR sculpting duo from the Netherlands called YONK. They're very good friends of mine, and we created this sculpt together on a stream on their YouTube channel, and then on my YouTube channel you can find in the live section that I also streamed the process of me rigging and animating this character and coming up with the animation and all that stuff in a couple hours, and it was super fun. So if you want an in-depth look at this process, go ahead and look there, but this is going to be sort of a quick overview of how I've set this stuff up and some of the tricks that I have for, again, rigging and animating using KineFX. So the first thing that I'll do is I'll take my model that I'm ready to rig. Here I brought this character in from Adobe Medium. I split it out into all these different parts and, retopologized them using the Exoside quad remesher, which is really great. And transferred the color back, did all the kind of, naming and grouping and stuff like that I needed to do, just for good measure. And I ended up with this sort of, nice retopologized version of our car salesman character. So then once I'm ready to start rigging, I need to first create the skeleton. And the way that I do this is very procedural with Houdini. I actually use this really useful node called the Straight Skeleton 3D Labs node. If you look it up, I think it's press tab, it's called Labs Straight Skeleton 3D. You'll see it takes a second to calculate, but basically what it ends up giving you is this really useful skeleton, and we can sort of see it here. I know that these lines are not the thickest. I'll polywire it so that you can see it better viewing from home. And you can see it gives us this sort of skeleton here. However, it's like super messy, and this is not sort of like our ending point for creating the rig. However, it's also not that bad, but it's also not symmetrical. As you can see, there's all these little weird issues. And the joints are not in the correct order, which is important for when you actually want it to have a hierarchy. The hierarchy is determined, I believe, by the vertex order, not the point order, the vertex order, which can be complicated. And if you look at CG Wiki, Matt Estella's amazing Houdini resource, probably the best resource out there, you will find in the KineFX section that he sort of talks about this whole process, which is sort of how I came up with this. But basically what I do is I get this, I delete half, so I take the half that I want to use, which we're going to make symmetrical again. I resample it, so you can see now the points are all evenly spaced and stuff. I fuse it because it's not fused properly normally. And then I run my special custom Rigify HDA that, again, I made based on Matt's awesome guide. And if you go into here, you'll see basically what this is I'm setting a root group, and then I go in here and it uses this edge transport node to transport out from the distance, or from the root to create this distance attribute, which we can then use to resort the points and use a polypath to, I believe, reconnect the vertices or something like that. I don't totally 100% understand what's going on here. But I'll provide a link to this HDA on my Gumroad if anyone wants to grab it. And the rest of these useful rigging KineFX nodes as well. I'll put them all kind of in one package. Then there's a rig doctor, which initializes the transforms and gives it names, which is sort of all the stuff that you need to have a working skeleton. And we go back out here and we'll see I have this sort of working skeleton. But obviously we only have one side of it. So what I do then is reparent any joints that are messed up, and I use a skeleton mirror to mirror the rig so that we have a symmetrical rig now. So that's nice. That's the rigging section. Let's move on. So animation wise, first, after our joint capture by harmonic, I should have mentioned that this is actually the thing that adds the weights, the joint weights or the bone weights to your mesh. And you can kind of see all the influences here, and you can repaint them using a joint capture paint node, which can be super helpful. But a lot of the times I'm honestly pretty good with it out of the box. The biharmonic capturing method is really great. So then I have my captured geo. I just stash it for good measure. Same with the skeleton, I stash it. Now there's this really handy option to stash things externally instead of just in the Houdini file, which I found really great for like quickly stashing stuff when I don't want to like bloat my Houdini file. So I do that, and then we can actually plug this into here, and we have a working rig already. However, nothing's happening. I can drop a rig pose node. This is the thing that we use to animate our skeletons and stuff like that, or create custom keyframes, and you can see this works great. And so I do a lot of posing with the rig pose node. Sometimes I just keyframe stuff on the rig pose nodes if I want, which is, you know, sort of like the old school way of animating in FK. But it works fine, and there's no reason not to do that other than that it's not the most procedural way of animating. But maybe that's fine. Maybe you want to do hand keyframed animation. You don't always want to procedurally model stuff. Sometimes you want to sculpt it by hand. And same goes for animation. So let's go ahead and take a look at this rig pose node real quick. I just want to point out a few more things. Now they've sort of made it really easy to just quickly select a bunch of joints like this, and then you can kind of animate them all together and get really nice bendy deformation. This was not the case with KineFX before. This was just, I believe, added in 19.5. So this is actually really great. Before, I think you had to press the S key and then select everything. Now you can just box drag over it and kind of do some fun stuff immediately. A lot of the times also I'll like select a whole bunch of joints and just like slightly move them before I keyframe it so that I get some kind of nice super subtle movement without having to like manually go and like move each joint individually. But there's other ways to do this too, and I've created a nice little HDA for myself that I'd also love to share with other people that I call rig noise. And I think that this should be something that exists within the KineFX suite of nodes already, or as a lab node or something. And hopefully at some point they'll add it. But for now, I just use my rig noise node and it works out. So let me show you how that works. So I'll just go ahead and make a new rig noise node here. And again, this is my own custom HDA, so you won't find this unless you grab it from my Gumroad or something. And right out of the gate, we get this weird, cool sort of, floaty animation. And this is kind of cool, but, what if we just want something a little bit more subtle? Well, I can go in here and I can change the scale or the amplitude of the sort of rotational noise. Now, I should talk about how I actually made this. It's not too complicated. Basically, you go up here and there's a switcher for the scale inheritance thing. I'll talk about that later. There's an attribute noise that animates the positional noise, which can be handy. But the real sort of meat of this is the rotational noise, which is created in a point VOP using a curl noise. And that ends up creating this noise attribute up here, which is a 3 float vector. And then that goes into this rig attribute wrangle where it's rotating using the curl noise attribute that we've created. And that's pretty much it. There's just a lot of settings that I've promoted to, play with the noise. This rotate function basically works by taking a amount, I think maybe in degrees or radians, I forget. Or it must be in radians because of the amount that it's rotating. And a vector that's sort of like the direction of the axis that you want to rotate stuff on, I believe. I could be wrong on that. I did this a while ago, so don't quote me on that, but the point is it basically adds curl noise to your, rotations and stuff. So if I hit play on here, again, you'll see I got this nice rotating, animating, guy, basically for free. And this is already really great for like messing with idle animations and stuff like that. And I can change the sort of like amplitude of the rotation. And if I play with this scale inheritance thing, it will basically change sort of how much the joints scaling are affecting each other. So maybe you want this on or maybe you don't. But regardless, I've just found this rig noise to be really useful. And I bet that someone could make a better rig noise, and if you manage to do that, I would love to sort of see what you do. You can also play with the position stuff and all that, but this can be a really fun way to make like a simple character. And you could apply this also only to your upper bones, for example, if you want. But you could also apply it to your whole rig, and then plant the feet just using FBIK. And if you're not familiar with what FBIK is, I can do a really quick little demo of that right now. So basically, to set up IK or FBIK, what we need is a separate chain off of our KineFX skeleton, and it just needs to basically only have the joints that the FBIK is making the rest of the full rig follow. So I'm going to use a blast. You could also use a joint delete. Let's actually just use a joint delete. Why not? And that deletes things based on name instead of a blast, which just will delete them based on point number. So that's pretty useful. There may be other reasons you want this, I'm not sure, but that's the main thing that I've found about it. And I'm going to go ahead and hit this guy and basically say I want to maybe delete these guys. And I'll hit enter. And then I'll say delete non-selected. And then I'll do FBIK. I'll plug the full skeleton here and the partial skeleton in the right part. And then I'll turn the display flag back on the joint deform. And we'll see nothing yet. And that's because this is set to use a mapping attribute, which we haven't set up. That's for sort of mocap retargeting or targeting one skeleton to a different skeleton. But these are the same skeleton, just with different amounts of joints. So we can just use the match by name attribute instead. And now you'll see the feet are kind of locking in place. And so what's cool about this also is I could go ahead and down here on the right side of this chain, move my skeleton around, and it will sort of automatically sort of pose the rest of him. So any information you don't give it, it just sort of figures out on its own. That's kind of a good way to think about FBIK, I think. So this can be really useful, and you can also tweak sort of the amount that the joints are being sort of forced to follow. So if I select maybe these two joints down here, I can like give them more weight, and it will sort of force the feet kind of closer together, or closer to that input from the right side. So that can be really useful also. I can have it so it just does the position as well, so that there's more kind of rotational allowance. Yeah, anyway, that's FBIK, super useful sometimes. I don't love animating with it usually because it can kind of cause a performance hit because it's an expensive calculation to a degree. The more iterations you have also, the more slow and expensive it is. But you can kind of play with all these settings, and there's other places where you can learn more about how FBIK works. But anyway, that is that for the rig noise. So I'll jump into another technique that I like to use a lot right now. So here's this other animation using the same character, and basically what I'm doing here is just cycling through a switch node using a bunch of different KineFX rig pose nodes. And you can see which one it's using very usefully by, maybe this won't really come through in the video, but which one has the dotted line and which one is the solid line. So I can see that it's using this. This is the diamond hands pose, and then this is sort of like the second pose that I made, which I just copied the diamond hands and then tweaked it. And it's cool because I get this really nice, fun little stepped animation out of the box. And in order to loop it, what I've done is I've put this function in it that says floor, so it's rounding down to the nearest integer, of $f divided by 5, modulo op inputs, and it's just grabbing the inputs from this node. So what that means is basically every 5 frames you are going to change you're going to go to the next pose in the sequence, but you're going to loop back around after you have gone through all of the frames. That's what the op inputs thing means. And if you aren't familiar with like what a modulo function is and how that works and this sort of logic, I learned about this primarily through reading Matt Estella's incredible Joy of Vex, again on the incredible CG Wiki, which I will always shout out because it's one of the best resources out there for learning Houdini. So check that out if you don't understand this exactly. But suffice to say, it's cycling through these. You could also keyframe it yourself. You can see how it kind of goes all the way from 0 through 8, and then it goes back to 0 and so on. So this is cool, and this is a fun way to animate. And what's great about this also is, like, you know, I could rig pose, you know, it keeps things very procedural. So I could say, like, maybe on like these 3 nodes here, I'll give myself some more space to work. Maybe on these 3 nodes here, I want to create another rig pose, and I will, in this rig pose, scale up my character's torso so that he's big in these parts. And it just allows you to sort of layer these different poses and things like that together. And then the switch basically functions as a sequencer. Now, I would love to see, the reason I'm using this and not using just a skeleton blend, which I'll demonstrate right here, is that it's a lot more difficult to deal with keyframing between all the different poses with the skeleton blend. However, the skeleton blend is really great in part because it's smoothly interpolating between these 2 different poses. So this is a really great way to also work procedurally, but when I just want like a sequence of different poses, like especially in a stepped animation, which is kind of a fun stylistic way to animate my character, it can be a good way to go. And it'll also look interesting if I say, take this animation and I add a rig noise on top of it. So you get these weird poses, but you also get like this sort of smooth motion in between them. So it's stepped, but it's not like a low frame rate animation necessarily. And I think this is really interesting, and like being able to stack all these different things together makes KineFX so much fun for me. So that is just the switcher. Now, let's say we like the sequencing of the switcher, but we don't want it to have this stepped animation. Well, there's this really useful smooth motion node that was added to the new version of KineFX, which uses this Butterworth filter to smooth out the animation. And I think it's meant for cleaning up jittery mocap, but it's really great for this kind of stuff. And you can have it work on translation and rotation, or just translation, which kind of results in this really interesting effect. Or you can have it work on Again, just rotation is a good way to do it. You can tweak the settings and change the cutoff frequency and see what kind of different results you get there. You can kind of add some jiggle and stuff to things, but it's a nice way to procedurally give some stepped animation. Before this came out, when I wanted to like interpolate between frames that were stepped like that, one thing I would do is just drop a solver, and I would skeleton blend between the animation and the previous frame in a solver. So it technically makes this a simulation, and it gives you some interesting kind of control over how this is working. But it also has a number of drawbacks, and hopefully the intuition is somewhat clear to the people watching this. This is a little bit of an advanced video, but if that's not making sense, I highly recommend just take any animated object in Houdini that you want to smooth out the animation for and put it in a solver. So here's some stepped, just like deforming sphere animation, any kind of deforming object with consistent topology, and take a blend shape and plug it in like this and see what happens when you turn it up to 1. Obviously, we're only going to get that input animation, but if we go back and we turn it down to 0.87, you'll get a little bit of blending, and it's kind of a cool effect. And then if you turn it down more, you'll get even more smoothing. And if you turn it down a lot, you'll get a lot of smoothing, but you won't get it kind of reaching that final shape as much. So hopefully that kind of illustrates that a bit. This is a really useful tool, just blend shapes in solvers to help smooth out time and things like that. So I recommend definitely playing with this. It can be super handy. Now, I think what would be really awesome would be if SideFX or someone else made an HDA, or maybe even just modified the existing skeleton blend node to have a sequence function. So instead of it being like you blending different amounts of the sliders, you just plug things in a sequence, and then you can animate it to 1, and then it blends to 2, and then back to 1. This is just sort of my idea, but I would love to see it implemented somehow. I haven't had the time to even think about how you would go about doing this, but I'm totally sure it's possible, and it would be a really handy thing, I think, in KineFX. And you can stack all these things in KineFX very intuitively, and it's really awesome. I really like with the skeleton blend, I could stack that after the switcher here, so that I have the first part of the animation where he's talking a lot, and then the second part I just blend to him kind of just staying in the one pose at the end. But in addition to that, I've also used this jiggler HDA that I've made, which I've shared with a lot of people before, but it basically allows me to add jiggle to this animation, and it kind of also does some interpolation and things like that too. So if I just drop a new jiggler HDA right here with the default settings, we'll see this is what it ends up doing. It does this crazy sort of jiggling. It's kind of a cool effect. There's lots of fun settings you can play with on it. I've noticed it's gotten much faster in Houdini 19.5, which is awesome. So you can kind of play with it in real time and just get really cool results out of it. I'm going to go back and plug this into the switcher so that it just keeps playing. But yeah, it's like really fun to mess with this and procedurally tweak your animation and get it to working the way that you want. A lot of the times what I end up doing is I just want a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of extra motion from what the stepped animation has. So just like a little extra bit of jiggle padding on it, but that's very subtle. I feel like it kind of is, I think of it as almost like the robot chickeny animation style. I also refer to this type of animation as snappy tweens. That's just my own terminology. I've been animating stuff like this since I was doing 2D animation back in 2005 with Flash. And it's just a nice little trick. But you can do it kind of nicely procedurally here by lowering this limit way down to something like 0.01. And now there's like, you'll see, it's not just snapping, it's just a little bit of extraness. And I could also increase the damping to make it even more subtle. I could change the stiffness of this. It's lots of fun to just sort of play with these settings. This is a weird effect. So yeah, the jiggler is really great, and if you want to know what it is, all it really is you go in here, and it's just a jiggle chop, basically, that I've wrapped in SOPs. And all those things are promoted back up to here. So I have a feeling that Side Effects did some kind of optimization with chops or something in the latest version, or at least with the jiggle chop, which is pretty great, and again, makes working with this even more fluid and fast. So yeah, that is the jiggler. And the final thing that I'll talk about here, which I've already talked about a number of times in previous videos, but I'll just reiterate again, is the secondary motion SOP, which was added in Houdini 19. It was something that I specifically requested and that I really love using now, and I'll just show you how that works really quick. So basically, the idea is that we have one joint in our chain, or it could be several joints in the chain that are animated, and those are the driver joints. And we want it to affect all the rest of the joints going down this chain, kind of creating a secondary motion through adding that same rotation with cascading lag and overshoot. And it looks really good. Let me show you what I mean. I used to do this manually all the time when I was hand keyframing stuff, but now I don't really ever have to, and it's awesome. So if I plug a secondary motion node into here, it doesn't do anything right off the bat. Again, I have to specify the driver joint, which is this point 24, and then I have to select the joint group that I want it affecting, which is all the ones after it on the chain. And I do that, and I hit play now, and I get this really nice sort of secondary motion that kind of comes through it. And this is what it does by default with hand keyframed animation, like this. And it's a little bit wonky. What's also cool is just driving this kind of thing with something like a sine wave, which I've done here. So this is just a sine wave moving up and down. You could do this by right-clicking the channel and going to motion effects and creating a wave chop dependency in this. Or you could just write a little function in here. And what I've done is said sine, so create a sine function, and I want it to basically animate over the course of 240 frames, or I guess I should say over 310. Or maybe I could just say $f end if I wanted to just grab the last frame, basically. And I want it to, over the course of these frames, animate maybe, let's say, 10 times. And then I want the amplitude to be 50, so it's going from negative 50 degrees to 50 degrees to negative 50 degrees, rotating on that that x axis. So I'll play that, and we see that's working. That's cool. Now let's do a secondary motion, and I'll go ahead and I'll grab the driver joint again, will be point 24, and I'll grab the joint group I want to affect, will be all the following joints, and I'll hit enter, and then I'll hit play, and I get this crazy stuff happening. Now, I probably want to reduce this effect by just cranking down the effect amount. And now I get this really awesome flappy animation with this cascading stuff going on, and it looks really nice. You can control the different amounts of lag and overshoot. So now there's more lag and less overshoot, or I could have it so that there's more overshoot and less lag. So I'll set that to 0.09, and we'll see that's sort of the result of it here. Kind of looks like he's a bird flying. I could make a really easy bird flying away animation using this and sine waves, and it would all be super procedural. And there's a bunch of other settings in here that I don't totally understand, I haven't played with. I don't really know how this gravity one works. And I should probably figure that out at some point. But lag and overshoot is awesome. It's a great default. There's also jiggle, which theoretically should add jiggle to my rotation. And it seems like it kind of works. I'm going to maybe crank this up a bit so you can kind of see it working better, or working more dramatically. Maybe I'll set this back down to 2, and I'll tweak the lag. and lower the overshoot. And you get just some really interesting kind of stuff going on. This isn't the best sort of result, but it's something worth noting that you can play with. There's also spring, which kind of does the same thing in a way as like a spring chop, I believe, that uses like a damping coefficient and all this other stuff to help kind of create this sort of springy bone effect. And that's pretty fun. Just sort of like, I think if I lower the damping, it maybe makes the springing less intense, or maybe if I raise it, it does. So when it jumps, it springs a little bit, but then it doesn't kind of keep going forever. We also have this to 2 instead. But yeah, you can have a lot of fun with spring. I've used this before for all kinds of stuff, including not characters, just like having an object that moves that I want to kind of have sort of bend as it's moving and rotating and stuff. And it can look really nice and create this really awesome, super controllable secondary action, again, procedurally, without having to keyframe it sort of baked into the animation. And that is basically the core of the stuff that I wanted to talk about regarding my rigging and animation KineFX workflow. If you're completely unfamiliar with KineFX, this might not make sense. So I would recommend for sure checking out my creating a mega character tutorial that I made for side effects, which covers everything from creating a character to animating them with and rigging them with KineFX to doing a whole bunch of cool vellum effects and things like that, and rendering out a final thing. It's available on the Side Effects YouTube page and the Side Effects website. I'll put a link in the description. There's also other KineFX related YouTube videos on my channel. And I also have a bunch linked on HoudiniNerd.com, which you should check out. And as I mentioned, I will put the 3 HDAs that we talked about that I made on my Gumroad, the Jiggler, the Rigify, and the Rig Noise. I find them to be very useful. Hopefully this will inspire someone to make an even better version. I may update these as well at some point. Also, hopefully at some point, Side Effects will just end up integrating this stuff into the KineFX toolset. So I don't know, we'll see what happens. I'm gonna put them on my Gumroad for $5. I really appreciate any support people can give me. I would love to do more tutorials and more teaching and start putting these out more regularly. And if I can sustain myself enough on just Gumroad and selling tutorials and things like that, then I can make even more content, and I would love to do that. So please support me, donate extra if you are feeling generous. I'm also thinking about potentially starting a little Patreon of myself with different tiers and offering different things, including a high tier that might include things like private tutoring. Let me know if that kind of thing would be of interest to you. I would be more than happy to jump on calls with people and help them figure out Houdini related things or teach people things. I'm also considering starting to offer some more Zoom classes as well. So the more of this stuff that I can do and sustain myself on, the more tutorials and teaching and educational content I can get out there. So I appreciate any support you can give me. As always, check out HoudiniNerd.com, jump in the Discord that we have. There's a lot of great people in there, and it's a great way to learn. And thanks a lot for watching.